Hey guys, welcome back to Portal of Wisdom. I'm back today with another story for you. If you are new to the channel, like and subscribe and click that little post notification bell so you get alerted when I post new videos. And if you have any more video ideas, you can also let me know in the comments. So now on to today's topic. Today we are going to talk about the world's oldest woman, or the oldest person in the world. She is said to have lived to age 122, but some things have been called into question whether she really lived to 122 or whether she may have been an imposter. So we're going to go over those details. And we'll give you a little bit of history on how she grew up and some of the details. Then we'll get into the details that make people question some things. So her name was Jeanne Louise Calment, and she was born February 21st, 1875 in Arles, France. And that is on the southern shore of the Mediterranean Sea in France. And it said she died in Arles, France, August 4th, 1997. And it is said that she's the oldest living person. She reached age 122. She's the only person to make it past 120 years old. But some recent research has determined that maybe everything is not quite as it seemed in her case. So her birth was well documented in 1875, and she had a brother born in 1865. Their family had people that lived to a long age. Her brother lived to be 97 years old, her father 93, her mother 86. At age 21, Jeanne married her double second cousin, Fernand Nicholas Calment, so her last name didn't change. Their paternal grandfathers were brothers, and their paternal grandmothers were sisters. So, anyhow, her husband, Fernand, was an heir to a drapery business in the center of Arles. So the family, once she got married, she lived with the family above the store. There was a couple apartments above the drapery store in the downtown area. And Jeanne had servants, never had to work. She had a pretty leisurely life. She did things like playing tennis, swimming, cycling, playing the piano, fencing, and roller skating. And Jeanne's only child, Yvonne, was born on January 19th, 1898. So Yvonne eventually married a man named Joseph Billet in February of 1926, and then they had Jeanne's only grandchild, Frederick, and he was born in December of 1926. So Yvonne, a few years after that, she would die of pleurisy, I believe, from tuberculosis. So Yvonne dies January 19th of 1934 on her 36th birthday. So she's, fairly young. And after that, Jeanne helped her son-in-law raise Frederick because, he and her grandson and the son-in-law lived in the apartment next door. So in 1942, Jeanne's husband, Fernand, reportedly died of cherry poisoning at the age of 73. Now, I don't know. I didn't look up the details on exactly what cherry poisoning is because he doesn't really factor into the story too much here. So in the 1954 census, Jeanne is shown in the same apartment with her son-in-law, retired Colonel Billet, Yvonne's widower. So her grandson now lived in that apartment next door by the 1962 census with his wife, Renee. So it's a little mysterious now. The widowed son-in-law is living in the apartment with Jeanne at this time after the death of of her husband and and his wife. So anyhow, but that's what the census says at that point. And so that was 1962. In January of 1963, Jeanne's son-in-law Joseph Billet died. So not too long after that census, Joseph dies, the son-in-law, and then her grandson Frederick died in a car accident later that same year. So by 1965, she is 90 years old, has no heirs left, and she happened to sign a life estate contract for her apartment or apartments to a Mr. It was Rafferty or something like that. So she would now get to stay in her apartment, and she would get 2,500 francs paid to her monthly until she died. And that it's kind of like a reverse mortgage. But this gentleman that did this contract with her, he ends up dying in 1995. So he never was able to take ownership or possession of the apartment. And since Jeanne is supposedly still alive, her or his family has to continue to pay her this 2,500 francs, a month. And eventually, in 1985, she is moved to a nursing home, and in 1997, she did die at the age of 122. So that's how the story goes. But I told you things aren't quite as they seemed. So it wasn't until some age verification and documents and things like that were dug through and some more questions arose. And there had been some interviews that had been done with her when she was supposedly in her hundreds, and they had questioned her about, various different things. And there had been a lot of different interviews and recordings of things and stuff like that people could look back on a little bit later when some more questions arose. So she had said one of the things that people, I guess, kind of had a red flag about was that in, I believe, 1988 in Arliss, they were celebrating 100 years that it was 100 years prior that Vincent van Gogh had been in the town of Arliss and had visited there and stuff like that. And so Jeanne had mentioned that that she had helped Vincent van Gogh in her father's store, I believe is what she said. At that time in 1888, that he came in and he was looking for canvas. So the problem with this is that she would have been 13 years old at this time, and the store that she seemed to be referring to belonged to her future husband's family, if this was the case. So not this wasn't her family store. If she was actually Yvonne, then this would be her future husband's store that she'd be talking about, because prior to her marrying into the family with the store, there were no stores in the family history. So and at that point, she said it was her father's store. Her father was a shipbuilder, down at the sea. So he worked at the shore. He didn't own a shop. So people thought, oh, that's mysterious. That doesn't seem right. And some people chalked it up to, maybe it was just a lie, somebody trying to pretend that they had something to do with Vincent van Gogh, and they didn't. So some people kind of chalked it off as nothing, nothing disproving or proving anything. But it was basically believed by a lot of people that as the death occurred in 1934, that it was not her daughter Yvonne. It was actually Jeanne. And this does make sense for a lot of people, because it would seem weird for her to live with her son-in-law after for Jeanne to live with her son-in-law after the passing, of her daughter. But if it was Yvonne all along, and Yvonne continues to live with her husband the whole time, and their son, and everything, then nothing really seems all that off about it. But people are saying that it seems that she did this for financial reasons. If if it really was Jeanne who died in 1934, they think Yvonne assumed her mother's identity for purely for financial reasons, and we'll get into some details about why they believe that and why that may have been beneficial. Another thing that people mention also is in 1975 in Arles, France. The papers and everything made a big deal about a 95-year-old woman. This woman was turning 95, and in 1975, Jeanne would have been 100 if that really was Jeanne, and obviously probably more deserving of some media attention and everything. And unless the locals knew she wasn't 100, and she maybe didn't want attention either, if she was trying to protect a secret that she had actually assumed her mother's identity and she wasn't really Jeanne, if this was really Yvonne all along. So people are saying if that's the case, she probably wanted to keep a low profile and not call any attention to herself. When the mayor of Arles heard that this Arles woman that supposedly was Jeanne was 100 years old, he wanted to bring her a gift, and he wanted to talk to her, and he got a very firm rejection from the family, or from her. It anyhow made its way back to him, and she didn't want a ceremony. She didn't want her birthday noticed or anything like that, and so her birthday just passed unnoticed, which seems a little bit funny too, unless maybe you are trying to protect a secret. But I mentioned we'd get into some of the financials, why this might have been the case. So the real reason that a lot of people believe that this happened, that Yvonne took over her mother Jeanne's identity, was purely for tax and estate reasons. So people said that from the late 1700s to around 1901, there was only about a 1 to 2% estate tax. So if you were inheriting an estate from your parents or whatever that died, you were only going to lose 1 to 2% to the state or to the country or whatever. But by the mid 1930s, those estate taxes were at 35% and climbing. So if Yvonne inherited her mother's vast estate, and it included, I believe, a farm and apartments and I think the store and all this stuff. A lot of money worth of estate. They said she would have had to give back 35% to the government. But if she pretended to be her mom now, then there is no money that needs to change hands. And, we're talking about the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes in today's money. So, that's a pretty big deal. Another thing that I saw on this too, which makes sense too, is that if she pretends to be Jeanne this whole time, she's also continuing to collect, the pension from Jeanne's husband, because I believe I don't know if he was in one of the wars. He had a pension anyhow, and so if Jeanne wasn't dead, then the pension continues to be paid. And there were some other details that came out. So some people said that obviously at the funeral in 1934, if Yvonne had died, people should have, saw her body in the casket and everything, and it should have been obvious what was going on. But people said if she supposedly died of tuberculosis, then it may have been a closed casket type of situation, and a lot of people may have stayed away. And if Yvonne was trying to pretend to be Jeannie, she could, people said that, you have a heavy veil on and everything, and maybe a lot of people didn't come to the funeral because of the, tuberculosis and everything, and it would have been easier to have a closed casket at that point so no one's noticing what's actually going on. Also, before she died, Jeannie was asked about the 1884 cholera outbreak in Arliss, which apparently had hit Arliss really hard, and she didn't recall it at all. And a lot of the older people in their hundreds like that, when they're recalling those outbreaks and things like that happen, they usually have a lot of detail and a lot of things that they remember. And at that point she would have been 9 years old, but people found it fishy that she didn't remember that cholera outbreak at all. Another thing they had asked Jeannie about was going to school when she was a kid, and she mentioned that a family servant had, taken her to school or walked her to school, and they had asked her, this is prior to her dying, they had asked her what that servant's name was, and she said that the servant's name was Marthy Tuchon, I believe is what she said, and they determined that Yvonne, when she was growing up, had a servant that was named Marthy Fuson, and she was born in like 1885. So they determined this seems to be the same person, but this person would be more likely to be a servant for the family and walking a young girl to school. Otherwise, the reverse doesn't really work. If the servant's born in 1885 and Jeannie is born in 1875, you wouldn't have a servant walking you to school that's 10 years younger than you. But if you're born in 1898 and you're 10 years old, and that servant is 13 years older than you, happens to be maybe a 23-year-old servant at that point, you can totally see how those numbers would work. Having a servant walking a 5, 7, 8, 10-year-old child to school and be working for the family. So people think that's also proof that this was not Jeannie, this was really Yvonne pretending to be Jeannie. It doesn't end there, though. They did ask her about her piano teacher that she had talked about, and she said that her piano teacher when she was young was named Cesare Gaston, and they looked through some records and they determined there was a Cesare Gachon, and this girl Cesare was born in 1882 when Jeannie, if this was Jeannie, when Jeannie would have been 7, so she wouldn't be learning piano from as a child from a younger child. But by contrast, when Yvonne was 7 years old in about 1905, the Cesare Gachon would have been about 37 years old, and so those numbers also work better too. And this person, she was listed as a piano teacher in the 1896 census, and a music teacher in the 1911 census. So during that time period where Yvonne was a girl and was getting music lessons, This all matches up that this would be Yvonne remembering when she was a girl and trying to project that it was longer ago and that, it was something that happened when she was, when Jeannie was young, as she was pretending to be, Jeannie. They did mention something else, that when Yvonne's son Frederick was young, they had made a compromise with him that because the public needed to think that his mother was dead and now he was living with his dad and his grandma, that he would refer to, now whether this is Yvonne or Jeannie, she's pretending to be Jeannie if it's not Jeannie, so that he was to refer to her as Manzani, which is meaning Mama Jeannie. So that's what they said. They didn't. I guess they didn't want him calling her just purely Mama at that point, because that might give it away. If the supposed grandma is being called Mama, and they're trying to kind of keep things under wraps. So, trying to think what other things they had talked about. There were a lot of different pieces of details. Oh, she was asked once if she met the 1904 Nobel Prize winner in literature. I don't know if he was from that area or whatever, but she was asked, "Did you ever meet this person? His name was Frederick Mistral." And she replied, "Yes, yes, he was a friend of my father, a friend of my husband." So there were some things like that that had happened where people felt that she slipped up. They also had mentioned when they asked her about where she grew up, she didn't recall or didn't even mention a move when Jeannie would have been like 13 years old. She had acted like she had lived in the same place the whole time, and she hadn't. She, up to 13 years old, lived in one place, and then the family moved, and she didn't recall that move, which if she was actually really Yvonne, that would have happened before she was born to her mom, and she wouldn't know any of those details. There was also a confusion of her eye color. So in the 1930s, it was stated that Jeannie's eye color was black or presumably dark brown, but in her later years, her eyes were green. So that was also something that people said, your eyes aren't going to go from black or dark brown to green. Um, I can't remember. I think I saw something that said the family graves maybe also didn't specifically list Yvonne's name on there, but it may have just had like the family last name. But anyhow, all these are details that people are pointing out that are stating that Jeanne Calment was, when she died, was probably actually her daughter, Yvonne Calment. So there's a big debate about that, and with them being pretty well off and being able to kind of stay out of the limelight. They didn't need to go back and forth to work, and they had some countryside homes and some of the places that they went. Even later in life, it was said that whether it was Jeannie or Yvonne, they asked the local people to call to call her Madame Calment, so as not to state a first name at all. So there's just a lot of details here that definitely shed doubt on whether she was truly the oldest person to live, because if she died in in 1997, that would have put her in the age of about, would that be around 99 or so? She wouldn't have even quite hit 100. So, anyhow, I don't know what your thoughts are about this, or this is something some people might want to look into, because it is a pretty fascinating story. Everything seemed to be as everyone expected. This old woman lived to be 122 years old, and it ended up being some other people that suspected some things were different. And there does appear to be some motives for why that may have happened at the time when obviously one of them died. So, I don't know. You can let me know what your thoughts are about this, and you can look up some details on Jeanne Louise Calment and see what your thoughts are, and you can let us know in the comments. Thanks. Oh, and like and subscribe if you like these kind of mysterious stories.